You're listening to episode 299. Yes, 299. And you know what that means? Our next episode is 300.
300 episodes. We'll have a little celebration next week. Welcome to Transforming Missions Podcast, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers. Tim, what are the marks of a church on mission?
Well, Sarah, I think we're going to talk about that today, aren't we?
Yes, we are. I just wanted to get the wheels turning. So let's say this from the get-go. In exploring the essence of a missional church, we recognize it as more than a geographical landmark. It's not simply the historic building at the intersection of First and Main, nor is it defined by the steeple or the number of people sitting in seats. The missional church isn't an it to be attended or a place where friends are invited. It's fundamentally a who, a community committed to embodying the ethos and practices of God's people.
Well, thanks for listening to episode 299. We can move on to 300 now, can't we?
Not so fast, not so fast.
Sarah, I think you have a definition you'd like to share with our listeners.
So this is the definition I learned when I was doing my doctoral work, and it hit me just this week that was 10 years ago. And so when I pulled out my notes, guess what? The definition stood the test of time. So here it is, and I'm going to say it, and then we're going to break it down, but I want you to hear the whole thing first. The missional church is the people of God partnering with Jesus in his redemptive mission in the world.
I would usually say, why don't you say that again? But let me say it. Not because you didn't say it right. It's just that I want to say it. The missional church is the people of God partnering with Jesus in his redemptive mission in the world.
That's the definition of a missional church, yes.
So let's take each section of that definition and explore its implications for leadership.
I'm not sure that we have enough recording time to do all of that.
Okay. So let's just take each section of that definition and introduce what it is and some of the implications for leadership.
That we have time for. So why don't you start us off with the people of God?
Sure, that should be a good one, an easy one, the people of God. So just saying that right there, we're not talking about a physical location and what it looks like. We're talking about the body of Christ. And if you've listened to any of the previous 2 or 3 episodes, we've talked about this on several occasions. So in other words, the living, breathing, relational entity that comes together to be the church.
Correct. I think you'll see by the end of this definition, the building is the least important aspect of being the church. The crux of the missional church is a transformation in identity and action. It's not about occasional community service like painting a school over the weekend. The mission possesses a church. The church does not possess a mission. So the people of God are conduits of the mission.
Sarah, it's so meaningful to me. Can I say that again? The mission possesses a church. The church does not possess a mission.
Yeah, if we could wrap our brains around that simple switch, we would be in a better place. I'll stop there.
So with what you've said, would it be fair to say that if people are the conduits of mission, that's when they become the church?
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that. Do you hear the shift? Instead of the church already being formed, it's the people of God who are the conduits of the mission who become the church. So the people of God are connected by the covenant we celebrate in baptism. A way to think about it is we're living out our calling. And as we do, we become a blessing to others. And at the same time, it's a recognition that there's both a privilege and a responsibility. The privilege being God has gifted and graced each and every one of us. The responsibility being then that we, as the people of God, become conduits of the mission and in turn cultivate environments where God is palpably present and active. Now, hear me. I didn't say we play God. We're empowered by God to do God's mission.
Sarah, I got to say, you're turning our understanding of the church inside out. We've been indoctrinated with the phrase, let's go to church. And we're having to unlearn how to talk about church, how we talk about God, and embodying the blessings in everyday life. It moves the faith conversation from a seminary classroom to an everyday recognition of God's presence. Oh, the question, where have you seen God today? It means that as the people of God, we embody the mission in daily life. Oh, it means we live what we believe in relationships. So I'm jumping ahead, I know. So what are the leadership implications?
So there are many, but I'm just going to give you one, and it's a big one. Leaders need to free people up to engage in the mission. And it means we're going to start talking about principles and stop conducting programs. The principles being, who are we at our core? What is most important to us as a church? What is the covenant that we're living into together? What is our mission? How do we talk about God? And we're going to come back to that one before we end this podcast.
Okay, we have three other parts of this definition, but I want to say one thing before we move on, and that is, in regard to being the church, it's not what we do, it's who we are. And that, I think that's a big deal, because we think about if we're going to be a part of the church, what's going to be our mission? What are we going to do to live into that mission? And actually where we're moving, or where we should be, is that we are the mission. We are living that in everyday life and relationships.
I want to quote you. It matters where you start. When you start with the people of God, you end up in a different place than when you start with the building.
Exactly.
When you start with the people of God, you ask the question, okay, how did God gift these people? And God, what are you inviting us to do? And who are you inviting us to be? When you start with a building, you look at a calendar and say, what can we program to fill this space? Those are two fundamentally different questions.
And we've talked about this before, and then I'll move us on to the second one. Much of my ministry over 50 years, I get that in every week too. Much of my ministry over 50 years was how could you get people into the building? And in fact, there were books written called The 7-Day-a-Week Church. And the shift, which probably should have taken place a long time ago, but because of the shifts in our culture and worldviews, is now that wherever we are the church. So it's not about a building. It's about those relationships. It's about being who God created us to be. Oh, we're the people of God. Let's move on to the second distinction of this missional church, and that's partnering with Jesus. Sarah, what would you like to share with us about that part of the definition?
So, partnering with Jesus is about love and action. The biblical parable of the Good Samaritan epitomizes the essence of partnering in God's mission. It challenges the perception that our neighbor is someone who mirrors our likeness, or someone who literally lives next door to us. The Samaritan, an outsider, is the protagonist, embodying the act of loving one's neighbor. The narrative invites us to, quote unquote, get off of our donkeys, to actively engage in others' lives, bringing the future kingdom into the present and re-engineering reality through acts of compassion and solidarity.
So this is Tim quoting Sarah Day. So you're inviting us to get off our donkeys?
Oh, goodness. So I don't have to mark this episode as explicit. I will simply say yes and invite you to consider another name for donkey.
Well, we could really have some fun with that phrase. I'll leave it alone.
Reggie McNeil actually published a book called with the title "Get Off Your Donkey." I'll link to it in the show notes. And if you're not careful, you're going to miss the point. Okay, move us along from donkey talk, or this episode might move on to Shrek or something else that we would have to mark it as explicit. What's the implication for leaders here?
Well, Sarah, I think I say it every episode, but maybe I didn't the last one. You've already said it. It matters where you start. If we remember that relationships are at the core of who we are as the church, we also remember that we are bound by our relationship with God and others. The implication then for a leader is this: you focus on developing and helping others cultivate relationships with Jesus, with one another, and with the community. Simply said, leadership is relational, period.
Nothing else to say on that one. So are we ready for the third part?
I am, yes.
Okay, so in Christ's redemptive mission, that's the third part. I'm going to say it this way. Everyone is a beloved child of God, even if they don't know God yet, even if they're behaving otherwise. None of us are so far off, so messed up, so sinful, oh, I said the S word, that God's love can't meet us where we are, love us for who we are, and help us to find a new way, all while encountering the love of Jesus. As United Methodists, grace embodies everything that we do. The grace that comes before that prevenient grace, the grace that meets us in the moment or season of transformation, that justifying grace, and the grace that calls us, propels us, and invites us to become more like Jesus, that sanctifying grace. On an individual, community, and global scale, the mission of the church is the people of God who partner with Jesus on Christ's redemptive mission. Notice what I didn't say. This isn't a crusade. Notice also what I didn't say. This isn't an opinion. If we're conduits of mission, we're conduits of love and hope. We're conduits of justice. We are the church in all places where there is societal influence. And now, period, my sermon is done.
I dislike it so much. If we're conduits of the mission, we're conduits of love and hope. We're conduits of justice. As leaders, this is one where we need the relationships we've talked about to help people have conversations and not be donkeys, because our world's a mess. We need conduits of love and hope.
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing going on in this world that the love of God we know in Jesus can't guide us through. That's one we need to hear again too. I'll say it now. Sin, when we miss the mark, gets in the way all the time. We miss the mark. It's misunderstanding. It's misinterpretation. Put miss in front of it, and it creates the anxiety of disconnection and breaks relationship and causes the anxiety that we live in the world. So being a conduit of love and hope helps keep that communication and that relationship together. So, Sarah, let's move on to the final distinctive.
And I think you already pointed us there. The final part is in the world. The missional church is the people of God partnering with Jesus in his redemptive mission in the world. We're to be salt and light in the marketplace. So think for a minute about church history. Not something we do, I know. Just humor me for a minute. The early church thrived in the marketplace. It was a marketplace phenomenon, demonstrating how to be salt and light in society. So here's the question. What is our influence in the public square? And I'm saying this in different ways because the world encompasses different things. Wherever you spend your time and wherever your neighbor spends time, the missional church is called to exhibit salt and light. And that's going to take courage. The question is, are we impacting our homes, our neighborhoods, our counties, our communities, our countries, our world with the love of Jesus? Or are we a holy huddle?
Another image, donkeys and holy huddles.
Let's hope the donkey doesn't crash the holy huddle.
I'll just say to people, you choose whether it's holy huddle or donkeys or the world. Holy huddles are a whole lot easier. You've likely heard me say, when you leave this place, wherever that place is, you're going into the mission field. So the leadership challenge or invitation is to equip people to get beyond their holy huddle, to turn that holy huddle outward and pay attention to the people and places God's inviting you to be a conduit of hope and of love.
So let me offer one more leadership implication about all of this. As Christ-centered leaders, we need to help people learn how to talk about Jesus in their ordinary life. You know, when we've said to you at the end of each day, reflect on where you encounter Jesus, you're not likely to use a theological dictionary to name those places. I recognize Jesus in my neighbor who was helping his elderly mother walk down the sidewalk. I recognized Jesus when I was having a conversation with my niece. When we were laughing so hard that we cried, we need to help people see how God shows up and shows off and is present in the midst of the ordinary. We need to help people get in touch with seeing Jesus in the ordinary, not just in that holy huddle, that beautiful sanctuary that we all love to gather in. So before I start preaching again, Tim, how would you like to close this episode?
I'm speechless. That's doesn't happen very often. But we talk about the missional church, and that should be our main conversation with everything we do. How are we the people of God? How are we in partnership with Jesus? How are we impacting the community? In every finance meeting, every trustee meeting, every council meeting, those questions ought to be the questions that shape who we are and what we're doing, so we get to the place that we're actually living who we are in our communities. I'm going to say something that'll get me in trouble, and because I'm not speechless now. It just boggles my mind why we want our buildings to be on a historic register, when the people all around us are crying out for love and hope, and we want to preserve our sanctuaries. So with that said, the challenge is, let's be who God created us to be. And if we do that in a sanctuary, when you leave that sanctuary, you're going into the mission field. But if you do it in where you live, work, and play, just know that you are the church, wherever you are.
That's a good word, Tim Bias. Thank you. And thanks for joining us this week as we explored 4 distinct aspects of a church on mission. If you're not already getting our weekly email, we'd love to stay in touch with you. So head over to the show notes page at transformingmission.org/299 and click on the button that says Sign Me Up. Each week we'll give you a little backstory on the episode, offer a leadership insight, and a visual spark for your week. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.